Name of the game here is not to become famous on the internet. The name of the game is to live a happy life.
So we're going to kick off real quick. My boy, Carlos Gil. Thank you so much for having me here in downtown LA.
It's always a pleasure chopping up with you. And I'm really excited about this. I have to say, out of all the podcast requests that I get, this is the one that I've been looking forward to the most, just because you and I have formed a relationship organically throughout the years. Obviously spent some time working at the same company together, but it's really been the relationship that we have formed that's given me an opportunity to see your come up. And I was really excited when you announced that you were going to do a podcast. As you know, I reached out to you. I normally don't reach out to people, say hey, can I be on your podcast? But with that being said, man, I'm happy to support you and just really honored that I'll forever be able to say I'm one of your first guests on the show.
And I'm not sure if you know this, but you're actually one of my few mentors that I have, that I actually do have formally or informally or non-formally. But yeah, you're somebody that I look up to, and especially in the space of being a Latino out here doing it in the social media space, killing it, obviously. So thank you. Keep doing what you do. And tell us a little bit more about who Carlos is, and maybe about your upbringing too.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Latino part before. And it's interesting because I am of Cuban descent.
Yeah.
So both my mom and dad were born in Cuba. Mm-hmm. I was born in the United States in South Florida, close to Miami. So I'm a first generation Cuban American. And it's interesting because you look to me as a Latino figure, if you will. And there's other folks that they'll reach out to me through social media and say hey, thank you so much for representing us. Thank you, for representing our kind. And I've never looked at myself, as weird as this might sound, I've never looked at myself as being Latino.
Yeah.
I consider myself just being Carlos, just being me. And I hate to be put in a box. And I'm not saying it's bad that you said that, I'm a Latino professional, but I hate being put in a box. And I see that happen so many times in the marketing industry, in the business space. You have conferences for Hispanics, for African Americans. I speak a lot on the general market side. And I would love to be able to speak at an Afrotech, even though I'm not African American.
Yeah. I
would love to be able to see more diversity across the board at these different conferences that I speak at. So to answer your question, and just kind of riffing aside, to answer your question, I grew up in South Florida, and my parents raised me, I'm an only child, my parents raised me in a very affluent upbringing. So I know we're probably going to get to this. I was telling you before we started recording that we're a byproduct of our upbringings. Yeah. My parents have always been very prideful of their upbringing. So they came to the United States when they were kids. Their parents immigrated from Cuba and brought my parents over. And my dad was a U.S. Army vet, or I should say he is a U.S. Army vet because he's still alive. And my mom grew up in Miami, and they grew up at a very different time. So they came over to the United States in the 60s. And it was just a very different time. My mom and dad are more American, I would say, than they are Cuban. So I grew up in a suburb in South Florida called Weston, very affluent upbringing. And I went to private school. So I don't relate, just going to throw it out there, and I might lose some street cred for saying this, but I really don't relate to the street culture of here in LA or even Miami or other places, because I didn't grow up around that environment. I went to private school. I grew up with kids whose parents owned car dealerships and, all sorts of, different businesses and so forth. My parents were always serial entrepreneurs. So that's really what I saw. And I think the way that that's progressed into me as an adult is I've always been chasing, in a way, my parents' success. And I went to private school. My parents drove nice cars, and we had Porsches in the driveway and all these luxuries and big house. So when I see people today online flaunting things that they have or they might rent to acquire, those are things that I really just look at. I'm okay, well, that's cool. I grew up seeing those things, so it doesn't really motivate me. What motivates me is, first of all, making my parents proud. Yeah. Because they worked very hard as immigrants to give me the upbringing that they gave me. And then, I'm a dad. So those are my two driving forces, is make my parents proud, even though I'm an older guy now, and, make my kids proud and provide for my kids.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned very, very, very briefly about that your parents were serial entrepreneurs. And can you touch upon like maybe some of the things that they did while you were growing up? Did they have multiple businesses or kind of? I feel like when you're growing up and you have that as as a model to look up to, it ingrains a different type of like hustle and a different mentality from a really young age. And I can see that shining through you now. So like, what are some of the things that they had their hands in a part of?
Yeah, so my parents, they did a multitude of things, and it's interesting because I never knew what the term entrepreneur was, honestly, until I was in my 30s and moved to San Francisco, and you watch a couple of Gary Vee videos on the internet, and then the word entrepreneur is like glorified. For me, my parents were always self-employed. So they did several things. My parents owned a construction company that did very well for themselves. My dad also formed a career path for himself while he was in the military that he continued in the insurance industry. And then my mom in the real estate industry. So I grew up in this household where sales was always happening. There was always a real estate deal being closed. There was always an insurance deal being closed. There was always a construction deal being closed. So I became at a very young age accustomed to how deal flows work. And I was exposed at a young age to traveling. I was exposed to eating at nice restaurants with my parents' colleagues, where they're work colleagues, where they're friends, whether they were neighbors. Because again, when you're an only child, I know you're not an only child, correct? It's really interesting when you're an only child, how you go along for the ride everywhere your parents go. Yeah. And when I was a kid, I was so bored. And it's funny because today, I forgot where I was at, but someone asked me if I had siblings, and I said, no, I don't. They're like, well, how's your upbringing? I said, it was very lonely and very boring because I was always around adults. And as I look back in hindsight, that really helped me develop into the person I am today, where you can put me in front of really anyone and I know how to form a conversation because I kind of learned that art of the deal, so to speak, in terms of ask the right questions, get to know people. So again, to answer your question, when I say my parents are serial entrepreneurs, it was because they had their hands in a lot of different pots, so to speak. But they were never your 9-to-5 employed people. Like my father to this day takes pride in saying he doesn't know when an unemployment check looks like. He doesn't know the color of it because he's never been unemployed.
It almost sounds like you were taught how to be super polished, and I think in today's day in the business world, that's almost something that people would pay for, like a ton of money, just to get what you got at a young age, and being around the experiences and kind of learning things secondhand and second nature from your parents. That's pretty cool.
I would say it was the exposure more than anything. So I think when you look, and I'm a parent now, so I see this, right? It's easy for parents to buy things for their kids and say here's a pair of Jordans for you, enjoy them. But my father would always buy me a pair of shoes and remind me all the sacrifices he had to make and what he had to do work-wise in order to provide me with those shoes. And I really didn't have a concept of what my parents did until I became older and things started to click, right? You go to school and you're in middle school and high school, then you start comparing what you have compared to what other kids have. So that was something that at a very young age became a driving force. Now, kind of moving along the lines, I started working at a young age. My dad, one of the businesses that he started was a restaurant in Bozeman, Montana, of all places. So I started working in my dad's restaurant at 14. And then I started working at 15, 16 as I was in high school at Blockbuster Video. I was selling shoes. Selling shoes really helped me, no pun intended, think on my feet. It really helped me develop my interpersonal skills, my sales skills. Because again, I'm an only child. So you see me now very outgoing, and how I am, that hasn't always existed. That's definitely a skill and a trait that I've developed over years. Yeah, and I even still develop it. If you put me in a networking event at a conference, even right now, I'm not going to be the guy that just starts randomly walking up to people. I'll have a drink, I'll kick back, I'll observe what everyone's doing, and I typically gravitate to someone in the room that I know, or someone that I saw throughout the day, whether it was in my talk or in someone else's talk. But going back to being an adolescent, I always enjoyed working. I always enjoyed making my own money. And that was something that I wouldn't say forced me to, but it was part of the decision when I dropped out of high school at 17 to get my GED, was the fact that my parents did give me that entrepreneurial upbringing. I had already gained experience working in technically the real world. Yeah. Even though there were kind of part-time jobs working at malls or working.
You were still working.
It's still experience. I already knew at that age, at 15, 16, 17, there's nothing I am learning in high school besides basic math and English and writing. There's nothing that I'm really learning that's going to prepare me for this world outside of the confines of traditional school.
When you were in high school, did you have any other, like aside from your daily class, did you have any other soccer, swim, basketball, any other hobbies or sports you played that you were a part of?
Yeah, I played football. So I played football up until my junior year of high school. And, I wasn't very good, like I'll admit. I played football, but I wasn't necessarily I wasn't balling either. It was just more or less like most kids, right? You get to a point where you play like elementary, middle school, and then once you start to get to high school, the competition level increases. Yeah. So I knew what my limitations were, but I always knew that I was driven by something so much more than school. I moved around a lot, again, because of my parents being entrepreneurs. So I went to 3 high schools in 3 years. And when you're a shy kid and when you're living in places like Montana and then Salt Lake City, Utah, and you're not Mormon and you're Hispanic, you know what I mean? Like, you have to find a way to fit in. So I think I got into more trouble than I'm probably proud of, but I grew up very fast. And that's something that kind of carried over with me throughout my career where, whether you want to call it rebellious, whether you want to say I was a loner, I've always tried to look at my surroundings as for what they are and how I can learn from it and really just grow as a person.
So you briefly mentioned that you dropped out of high school at 17 on your way to get a GED. Could you kind of maybe fill in the blank from 17 to now? What is it that I guess pushed you in the direction of dropping out and kind of brought you into this field of marketing and social media marketing, and how you kind of developed your brand over the past 10, 15 years and have done a really good job in the space and become a leader in the space?
So my mantra-ish is that we live our lives in stages, not ages. So when I think back on my career, I break it down into different stages of where I was. So I dropped out of high school at 17. I sold shoes for a little bit. I went to lease apartments, and then I got married at a young age. So I married my first wife at 19. And that forced me to grow up very fast. So my parents, kind of being old school, Cuban Americans, said to me, the day that you get married, you're out of the house. So
you're on your own.
You're on your own. So it forced me to get a better job than just working in retail. And my first gig in the corporate world came at 19, working for Citigroup. So I worked for Citigroup for one of their subsidiaries called Citi Financial. It was a lending company. We're doing personal loans, mortgages, etc. It was in the subprime category. So if you're familiar with all those bad mortgages that were done in the early 2000s, that was, one of the companies I worked at was responsible for a lot of those. But that's what gave me my footing. So again, it kind of went back to, I was in a corporate environment. I learned very, very young what it meant to work in corporate America, what it meant to live on a fixed income, what it meant to have several layers of chain of command. And one of my kind of big breaks early on came when I was working at this call center at Citi Financial, and I was just like the top salesman in the company. And really young again. So I was selling loans to people that had credit cards with Citi. And that got me into the management leadership program for Citi. And the way I got into the program was it required a college degree. I didn't have a college degree, but I had experience. And I was able to get into the program because I wrote a letter. Back then we didn't have email. So it's going to make me sound really old. We're talking about realistically 2004.
Yeah.
So in 2004, there's no email at Citigroup. So I wrote a letter to the CEO of the company. And I carbon copied, because back then you would send a fax to anyone and then you would have to fax, different people. So it was letter to the CEO of Citigroup at the time, carbon copied every one of his direct reports all the way down.
Everybody saw
a move that would probably get anyone fired nowadays. Imagine, any company emailing the CEO and then all of his or her direct reports. Yeah. That would get you fired.
Yeah,
that would be a conversation where you're being escorted out of the building. What I did was I took a risk. I wrote a letter. I said, look, I'm Carlos Gil, and no bullshit. I have the letter today still. So if you come to my house and we kick it, I'll show it to you.
Definitely.
Long story short, I wrote this letter, introduced myself, said, these are all the things I've done in the 2 years I've worked for this company. Top performer, top salesman, top of my game. I feel that I'm more deserving to get into this program than your average employee here. And all I'm looking for is an opportunity. And the opportunity was given to me. I was the first employee in company history to be entered into their management trainee program without a college degree. And I went to this program. A year later, I was running a multi-million-dollar branch at a very young age. And then I used that as a stepping stone to go work for a bank. So I was in the Southeast at the time, and I got an opportunity to work for Regions Bank as a branch manager. So I'm 23 years old now, manager of a bank. So where I'm going with this is that was like the first phase of my career. I wanted to work in banking because I spent, and a lot of people don't know this about me. So like you were saying off camera, like I want to talk about things that people don't know. I spent the first 6 years of my career working in banking. I could sit down and talk to you about financial services all day long. That was ingrained in my DNA. 2008 happens, the economy hits. I happen to be working for AIG at the time, and I'm gonna have a job at 25. The day I lost my job, so it was November 5th, 2008, was the same day I joined LinkedIn. I lose my job. I call my mom, and she was the first person I called. And I said, Mom, I just lost my job. I want to give you a heads up and let you know. And she said, so sorry to hear about that, but I know you're going to be fine. You need to immediately join this website that your dad and I have been using called LinkedIn. And I said, well, what the hell is LinkedIn? And back then, this is 2008, there was like MySpace, Facebook wasn't really like jumping yet. There, Twitter, I think might have maybe just launched barely, but like social media wasn't mainstream like it is today. So I joined LinkedIn and the light bulb immediately went off like, wow, I now have access to people like me that have just lost their job. You would turn on the TV in those days, and this is November of 2008, and there was people losing their jobs by the thousands. Like the same month that I lost my job, 500,000 Americans lost theirs too. So I figured out very quickly, I'm not going to get a job in banking anytime soon. I need to do something different, something to rebrand myself. I don't have an education. So kind of going back to that, right? Like I took a risk at a young age, but then it's risky when you don't have that degree to fall back on. So without having any options, I decided I'm going to give, the entrepreneurial world a hand. And I started up an online job board. I learned how to code. I made my own website, bought a domain, obviously. It's called Jobs Direct USA. And I built, and you're going to get a kick out of this. Have I ever told you this story?
I've heard it, but the listeners.
Well, I'm going to tell your listeners. They're going to get a kick out of this. I built a business and rebranded my entire career to get me to where I'm at today using LinkedIn.
Oh my God. It sounds even better in person.
So here's how I did this. Let me break down the methodology. So to anyone listening right now that's doing the whole social media game and wondering like, how do I flip social media into a business? You need data. First and foremost, the checks will come later. The revenue will come later. You need data. So I start up this online job board, and I don't think you know this part about it. Like a month in, I meet a venture capitalist that lived in Jacksonville, Florida. And I had 3 meetings with this guy. Day 1, the dude loved me. We met at Panera. I'm telling the guy like my vision. I want to help try to get America back to work again. I want to put Monster out of business. I want to do this thing. I want to be the guy that saves the United States economy when it comes to employment. Guy's like, I love you, love your passion. Let's meet tomorrow. And I'm thinking, I went home that day. I'm thinking, oh, this guy's about to drop millions into my startup. The next day, he hated me. The next day, he broke me apart. Like, dude, when I say broke me apart, just like broke me apart and said to me, I want you to come back tomorrow because tomorrow I'm going to give you the best lesson that you will ever have of your entire career. I said, sure. I came back the next day. We met the same Panera. And he said to me, I want you to go out and get 40 new customers. I don't care how much they pay you. I want you to get 40 people to cut you a check, even if it's $1. And I want you to go through their procurement process. And once you come back to me and you say that you've had 40 paying clients, I will write you a blank check for as many dollars as you want.
Because you hadn't done shit at the time, right?
I hadn't done shit.
Yeah.
What do you think happened?
You did it?
I never spoke to him again. You know why? Because I didn't need his money.
Yeah. Because
what I figured out at a very young age was, if you want to make something happen, you have to go make it happen first and foremost. So I'm looking at this website back then, LinkedIn. I'm thinking, all right, I'm starting an online job board with 0 people in my database. How am I going to grow this database? I started creating groups on LinkedIn. So I literally took all the top cities in the United States. I created one group for Jobs Direct USA. And that was like the hub group. And then I created like a Jobs Direct New York, Jobs Direct Atlanta, like on and on and on and on. And I think these groups honestly still even exist. If you go on LinkedIn, you'll see them. Back then, and I'm not sure how it works now because it's been several years, but back then when you would have your own group, you could create your own almost like click funnels, like your own sequenced templated emails. You know what I'm talking about? So someone would request to join my group.
And it would auto send.
And it would auto send them an email from LinkedIn. It wouldn't come from Carlos Gil. It would come from LinkedIn. It looked like an official LinkedIn email with a LinkedIn template. And then you would customize what it would say in the text and would literally say something along the lines of, thank you, Ish, so much for requesting to join. While we review your application, visit jobsdirectusa.com to sign up. I did that for a year in combination with hosting events, and I learned how to growth hack LinkedIn. So I start creating these groups all over LinkedIn. And those groups, I started creating them on Facebook. Once I started joining Facebook, next thing you know, I have a database with over 100,000 emails, recruiters, job seekers, and I start selling services to the people on the list. I start connecting the job seekers with jobs. I started hosting events called pink slip parties, leveraging this data. And next thing you know, I now have a full running business.
You said you started hosting pink slip parties?
Pink slip parties.
that has to be one of the best party names I've heard.
So pink slip party, and I'll explain to you what also resulted in this. So you can kind of connect the dots with how I've gotten to these various stops throughout my career. So I learned how to growth hack LinkedIn to be able to build a database.
Before people were even growth hacking.
People were growth hacking. And then there was also I'd connect with people, export their information, drop it into a CRM, email them. Like all that stuff is more like on a junior level. But the whole group hacking was something that really wasn't being done.
Yeah.
And I want to say they even killed that feature. So that really necessarily wouldn't work in today's ecosystem. But with that being said, the pink slip parties were these networking events where I would go to a bar on an off night. So let's say like a Monday or Tuesday night. And I'd go to like a Blue Martini in Orlando or Miami. And I'd say, I'm going to fill this place up. I need free drinks for everyone that comes from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And I would literally go back to LinkedIn. They actually used to have an event section. Before there was Eventbrite, there was like Meetup and there was like LinkedIn events. So again, I'm going real old school now. So I would promote all of my events on LinkedIn. I had groups in all these different cities. So I would send out announcements. And then this is where it got good. I started growth hacking Twitter to connect with reporters at all of these different cities to promote the event. So I became almost like a club promoter for people who were unemployed at the time. And once media started getting wind of these events I was hosting, well, then they would put my event on their website. They would tease it on the 5 o'clock news the day before. They would send news trucks to come out to my events. And then I would take the footage of that event and I'd promote it for the next one. And I would promote it on YouTube and I would promote it on LinkedIn. So it's really cool. If you go right now on YouTube and type in Jobs Direct USA, you will actually see news clippings of me 10, 11 years ago doing these pink slip parties. So little by little, I started realizing how you can kind of growth hack all these different mediums. Now, what happened with the pink slip parties was this. People would come to my events. They would have an amazing time. They would meet recruiters. They would eventually expand their network at very minimum. If you were coming to one of my events, you were expanding your network when you leave there, meaning like you're connecting with people on LinkedIn. 2, they would get jobs. And what would happen was when these people would eventually find employment, they would think back to who was there for me when I was at my lowest point. And it was Carlos Gil. So when they were in a position to pay it forward, then they would refer me to the company that just hired them. Or they would go to their HR department and say like, hey, you really need to get on board with this guy named Carlos Gil on Jobs Direct USA. So year 1, I made no money. I went broke. Like when I tell you, dude, broke, like literally my 2 cars got repossessed. My house was under foreclosure. Negative money in my bank account. I literally went to Orlando, Florida when I had to sell what was left in an E-Trade account, which wasn't a lot of money, in order to fund my travel to rent a car to get to Orlando to help people who were unemployed find jobs, and then drive right back because I couldn't even afford a hotel. And I got to a point where I was really tested emotionally because friends of mine would see all the things I was doing and they were saying to me directly like, dude, you're worse off than these people that are coming to your events. You're trying to help people, but you're not even helping yourself and you have young kids. and you have no car and you have no money and you're broke. And dude, like there was just something in me that said like, fuck it, I'm going to keep moving forward. Like I don't want to give up on something that feels good to help others, because I know if I stick through this long enough, there's going to be something that comes out of it. Mm-hmm. And if I would have told you 10 years ago, like, dude, I'm 25 now, when I'm 35, I'll be a best-selling author, I'll work for the same company that right now I'm hacking their data. Like I would have never thought that would be the path where I would go. Mm-hmm. But what ended up happening was one of the companies that was in my backyard was Winn-Dixie. They're one of the biggest supermarket chains in the US. So they came out to one of my pink slip parties. Actually, let me take a step back. Amy Ripper, who now is one of the folks that leads talent acquisition for Winn-Dixie. This actually is really good. She was at one of my pink slip parties that I did.
As an attendee.
Yeah. She was unemployed and she came to one of my pink slip parties. And when she got hired at Winn-Dixie, then she started coming to my pink slip parties on behalf of Winn-Dixie. Amy one day hits me up through LinkedIn on a Friday afternoon. And she hits me up on LinkedIn and says, Carlos, we just missed the deadline to put an ad in the Jacksonville Business Journal. And we're going to be doing a job fair on Monday. Can you help us get the word out? Now, she figured I've already done pink slip parties in Jacksonville. I have this network built up. I didn't even know how much to charge Amy. I had no idea how much this is worth, what to charge. Like, remember before we were talking about what do you charge? I literally threw out a figure to her. It was like $150, $200. Kid you not.
Just out of the air.
Out of the air. I remember that I needed the money bad. I sent her a PayPal. She paid it right away. I literally spent that entire weekend promoting a job fair that was happening in 48 hours. Writing up a press release, sending media alerts, hitting up every topics group, every LinkedIn group, Facebook, everywhere I could go just to get the word out. Monday rolls around, they have 300 professional job applicants show up, all in suits, for supermarket jobs. And they were hella impressed, because think about this. What's the community on LinkedIn? It hasn't changed in 10 years. It was professionals, right? So professionals, unemployed, they want to work. So they were showing up as professionals wanting supermarket jobs, bagging groceries, right? Working in management roles even. Winn-Dixie, the whole point I'm going here is Winn-Dixie was so impressed that they reached out to me and they said, we want to start participating in all your job fairs. We want your company to do all of these events for us.
To help us recruit.
Yeah. So then I became really well at social recruiting, and that parlayed into me teaching companies how to leverage social media to recruit. Fast forward a year after that, Winn-Dixie offers me a job to go work as their first ever head of social media. So let me just break this down for you real quick, because that was actually phase 2 of my career. So phase 1 was banking. Phase 2 was I'm unemployed, yet I have a business. I don't know how to run a business. I'm not making money in business, but I'm just doing more of like feel-good activities. I don't know how much I'm worth, and I threw out a number that led me to an opportunity. Had things never happened in sequential order like that, I wouldn't be sitting right now in downtown Los Angeles talking to you at all. I don't know where the hell I would be. I don't know what I would be doing, but we wouldn't be having this conversation. So phase 3 of my career then begins working at Winn-Dixie. So my first ever marketing job, right? A job that required a college degree. I got it. 6-figure paying job, which in Jacksonville, Florida, if you're making $100K, like you're living good. And for me, it was an opportunity to really rebuild myself in a few different areas. Transparently speaking, rebuild my credit, because credit's extremely important. It helped me also rebuild my bankroll. I went through a bankruptcy, so it helped me get back on my feet and give me the capital I needed to do the things that are important, like buy and finance a car, finance a house and get a mortgage. Like these are all things that we don't necessarily openly talk about in like marketing and entrepreneur podcasts, because people give this illusion that they own all these things cash, but like you need to have credit in order to acquire these assets. So I looked at me going to work again as it's going to help my family and I rebuild, but it's also going to give me experience that I don't have. Like you can front and fake it, that you know marketing or social media, and it's one thing to do social media for yourself and your business. It's another thing, as you know, when you work in social media for a company and you're responsible now for the image of $1 billion organization. So I started social media up for Winn-Dixie. I was there for 2 years. It was just phenomenal experience.
Really quickly, so you were head of social for Winn-Dixie. Was part of your roles and responsibility like social recruiting, or was it just like building out the social platforms and the channels and the following, or what exactly did it entail?
I started off as a team of one in the marketing department running all social media for Winn-Dixie. So this is where being an entrepreneur really came in handy for me. And for anyone that's listening to this that works for themselves and has aspirations of working for a bigger brand, like there is value in you working for yourself because you learn some like soft skills that corporate America doesn't necessarily teach you, which is like you have to hunt for what you kill, right? Like you have to be assertive. You have to be on your A game at all times. So that really helped me in that corporate role because I was actually building something from the ground up. There was no budget. There was no employees. There was no team. It was like, we're going to hire you for you to figure it out. And I looked at that gig. Like I remember thinking, all right, I'm going to go work for Winn-Dixie for like 3 months. And I kind of looked at it as like a project gig, even though I was a full-time employee. And I figured, all right, like I'll do this for 3 months. I'll get out. I'll go work for myself again. Because I also learned very early on working in corporate that like the whole personal brand thing, like you don't have the luxury to do the things that like I used to do on my own because now I work a 9 to 5 and I have multiple layers of bosses that I report to. So I had to be really scrappy in that role, especially not having a team and not having budget. And eventually those things came, but like anything else, right? You wear out your welcome, you hit your ceiling and you want something bigger. So at this point in my career, I wasn't doing public speaking yet. I didn't know really who the influencers were in the space. So I worked at Winn-Dixie just to level set on date from 2012 to early 2014. Okay. So the space back then was still somewhat relatively young in social media. Like it wasn't like today where you have people who have experience in the industry. Back then, there was 3 people I really looked up to who were like influencers, and it was Gary Vee, it was Jay Bear, and it was Ted Rubin. In terms of like influencer marketing, I started up a blogger program. And those really were what influencers were back then. They were mommy bloggers. They were deal bloggers. They were people that had blogs. They had a following through the blog. They had a newsletter through the blog. And then they happened to have a social media following that would carry over. So those were like influencers. In terms of like career influencers, that didn't exist yet. So I leave Winn-Dixie. I go work over at Save-A-Lot in the Midwest. And I was there for a year. So around that time, I started getting invited to go to conferences. I got started, doing panel sessions, breakout sessions. I wasn't doing keynotes back then, but the company I worked at had a conflict with me speaking. And that's really where I started kind of learning like how this all works in corporate.
And because you were working at a company, you weren't getting paid for these side gigs, maybe some all branding, or how did that work?
So it's interesting because no, I wasn't getting paid to speak. I was director of digital marketing. So I had social, email, web that all kind of fell under my purview. But around this time, I started seeing that there was these conferences that were happening in the retail industry and in marketing, and I wanted to be a part of it. I felt that there's a lot of value that I would get by going to conferences. And the only conference I'd really attended at this point was one called Dreamforce, which I know you're familiar with being in San Francisco. So I've been to Dreamforce twice when I worked at Winn-Dixie. In fact, and that conference really kind of like opened up my eyes to what exists in the corporate world outside of the 4 walls that you work at every day. And as you know, living in San Francisco and going to Dreamforce, like Dreamforce goes all out. They pull out all the stops. It's huge. You have big brands there, great for networking, amazing parties. And when I'm at Save-A-Lot, now I'm thinking, okay, I want to start going to these different conferences because, again, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier on. Like, I don't have the college degree. So for me, networking has always been vital to my success. Like, I look at networking like a 401k account. Every person that you meet has a value. You deposit that person into your 401k. And the longer that you season the relationship, then over time, that relationship organically increases in value. And you can only really do that in a couple of ways. 1, social media. 2, actually going outside of your comfort zone and meeting people. And conferences, what better place that you can meet, directors and VPs and C-suite executives of different companies. So again, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, working at Save-A-Lot. They weren't cool with, me going to conferences. The relationship didn't last very long. Let's just say that. I came back from Christmas break. How many years has it been since we parted ways? I think I can speak about it now. So I think we're past the 5-year mark. So anyways, look, in corporate America, layoffs happen. You get fired. Shit happens. I'm no stranger to that. And that's what brought me out to the West Coast. And I think that was another phase of my career, which, I'll kind of turn the mic back over to you. But it's what brought me to LinkedIn, was getting let go from a job where I had these high aspirations. I wasn't given the runway to do what I wanted to do. And I went out to the West Coast, and I knew, okay, I need to be in a San Francisco, Chicago, or New York in order to grow.
Yeah.
Because I see like all the people that are making moves online are in these big cities. And for me, it was really important to be in a big city. And the whole LinkedIn thing happened kind of by accident, to be honest with you. I was in San Francisco interviewing for a job over in Oakland for Clorox. And I'm in an Uber, doing an Uber pool, and I meet this recruiter who works for LinkedIn at the time. And we start having this conversation. I'm in a suit. I think she had just come out of the gym, and we just started having this organic conversation. Uber Pool was really, really new back then. So this is the beginning of 2015. Uber Pool is really new. So we just started having a conversation. She's like, "What are you doing in town?" I'm like, "I'm here for a job interview." And she asked, "Well, what are you interviewing for?" And I said, "For a social media job." And she's like, "Oh, that's cool. So you work in social media." I work in social media too, for a social network. And I go, "Great. Which one?" And she says, "LinkedIn." And I'm like, "Really?" Let me tell you how LinkedIn has changed my entire life. So I gave her a very abbreviated story of what I just shared with you and your listeners, but she came away like so impacted by my story of how LinkedIn had made an impact on my career that she gave me her card, and she said, like, we're hiring for a couple different social media roles. Give me a call if you're interested. And man, I went back to St. Louis that weekend. And went online, applied for a role, and I was back in San Francisco the following week. Now, what's interesting about it, have I told you that there was other people in the mix for the role?
I did not.
I've never told you that part of the story? All right. So I don't think he would mind because he's written about it in his book. I wrote about it in my book. Travis Wright. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
Does that name sound familiar?
Yeah.
So Coca Sexton moves on from his role, and he goes to another part of LinkedIn. And there was an opening for Coca's role. So I happen to see Travis Wright in San Francisco while Travis is in town interviewing at LinkedIn. Yeah, that's how good this gets. So I'm at a networking event. I've never met Travis in my life, but this is the irony in this. When I lost my job at Save-A-Lot, Travis was one of the first people to reach out to me. A guy I'd never met in person before, but I was like, "Dude, I follow you. I want to help you out. Let's do a campaign together called Hire Carlos." Travis Wright invested his own money into building a Facebook page that still existed called Hire Carlos. He was trying to prove that your Facebook page can be a new resume and that you can use Facebook ads to target recruiters at companies that you want to work for. Travis drops his own coin on Facebook ads to help me get a job. So I'm in San Francisco. All of a sudden I see Travis at an event. I'm like, "Dude, what are you doing here?" It's not like I was announcing where I was at. He wasn't announcing where he was at. We just happened, literally ran right into each other. And he's like, "Oh, I'm here interviewing for Coca Sexton's job at LinkedIn." I'm like, "Oh, cool. That's dope." I'm not thinking anything of it. I haven't met the recruiter at LinkedIn yet. I don't know what's what. Long story short, I interviewed for the job at LinkedIn, and I had no idea that Travis and another person were finalists for the same role. So when the job offer comes in a couple of weeks later, I'll never forget this. I was actually in, I want to say, Tampa, Florida, because I was in Tampa interviewing for another job. And Joy calls me, Joy. So Joy calls me and she's like, "Hey, we want to make you an offer, but we want you to keep this on the down low before we announce it to a couple of other candidates in the mix. One of them happens to ironically live very close to you." And as soon as she said that, it was like the light bulb went off. I go, "Hey, are you talking about Travis Wright?" And she's like, "OMG, how do you know?" And I was like telling her this story. Like, this is a very small space that we work in. And I kind of started connecting the dots throughout the interview process. And then I kind of started tracking his progress, and I'd go on Facebook and see where he was checking in. So Travis, if you're listening to this, sorry to throw our kind of story out there, but it's ironic, right? At the end of the day, I took that role at LinkedIn, and I wasn't there for very long. And Travis and I have talked about this over drinks, and we've laughed about it many times. How all these things kind of happened and came together.
When you first started your career in social media marketing, did you have aspirations to work at a company like LinkedIn and do social media at a company like LinkedIn or like a Twitter or like a Facebook? Or what were you thinking when you were going into this field that was already super new? There weren't that many like key players that had been doing it for a super long time, so there wasn't like a roadmap to follow. Like, what were you thinking going into the space?
So here's the thing: I never looked at these social networks as being on my radar roadmap for my career in terms of wanting to work for any of them. Because again, like when I started professionally on LinkedIn 11 years ago now, like these social networks are still new. Mm-hmm. Social media, has matured and evolved greatly over the last decade. Yeah. So my aspiration was never like, I want to work for them. The whole LinkedIn thing that came to be just really, we were talking about this before. Like, I don't believe in luck. I think it was more of like destiny more than anything to be in that car at that right opportunity. But no, never aspired to. And like, here's the thing too, growing up in South Florida, even though I grew up in the 90s and tech wasn't what it is today, like we don't have these conversations in South Florida in terms of like working for a Google or working for Facebook. Even like when I go back home to see friends of mine, like it's not on their radar. Yeah. Right? I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of these tech companies face. Like one of my good friends heads up diversity recruiting for Facebook, and Willie's always at historical Black colleges and universities. Right? He's always on the road trying to educate the masses in these different communities around working in tech. And I think, man, I don't want to say it's like a real problem, but I think it's an eye opener that outside of like the Silicon Valley bubble, outside of, certain markets in the US, like it's not really put on kids' minds at a very young age that that's an opportunity. And I think that's going to change, right? Like, especially you look at a company like Amazon that's starting to open like distribution centers in, middle America. And they're kind of starting to pop up, and even like, LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, like they're starting to open up campuses in like the Austins and Detroits of the world. I think that's going to start to change. But no, to answer your question in a very long roundabout way, I never aspired to work for any of these companies.
Yeah. Well, you did it. Okay, so you got to LinkedIn. You're working there for a little while. What happened next, or what's going on next in your life?
Yeah, so I go to LinkedIn, and look, to be candid with you, I was not a culture fit at LinkedIn. I think that I got there not really understanding, and it's all on me. It's a maturity thing, or it was a maturity thing. I went there not truly understanding that when you work at a company as high caliber as LinkedIn, or if you work at Facebook, or if you work at Google, you're in the big leagues. And I was exposed to that at the first social media marketing world that I went to, where I was invited to this dinner where I'm sitting next to like Jay Baer and Mari Smith and Guy Kawasaki. And I remember going back to LinkedIn after a photo coming up on Facebook, ironically, and Coca Sexton actually said, like, you're in the big leagues now. And working on LinkedIn was cool because it gave me a perspective of like the inner workings of a social network. It really exposed me to who influential people were in the business world, because as you know, like LinkedIn has its own influencer program, and there's certain individuals that they want to collaborate with on webinars, or whether it be contributing. And I don't think I was ready for that point in time in my career. As weird as it is to say, because I was 30 and I'm 35 now, but there's like such a big difference between Carlos Gil at 30 and Carlos Gil at almost 36. I'll be 36 in a couple of weeks now. Such a big difference between who I was then and who I was now. And working there, I was around a lot of younger professionals that that was their first gig. And for me, LinkedIn was not my first gig. But I just don't feel like I was ready for the big leagues, as weird as that sounds. And, it didn't work out. We, had a mutual parting of ways. The good news is that now I work with LinkedIn again as an instructor for LinkedIn Learning, which I think is a testament to what happens when you go back to the shed and you sharpen your tools, right? Just because you're not a fit somewhere today doesn't mean that you won't be a fit years from now. Because what I was looking for back then for my career, corporate America couldn't really give it to me. I wanted to be able to have the autonomy that I could do the Carlos Gil thing with the personal brand. I could go speak at conferences. I could, for the sake of saying, I could moonlight, or I could, work independently while still having an earning coming in through a corporation. That was very stressful at the company that I went to go work at after LinkedIn, BMC Software, where I'm hired to do a gig. I'm a global head of social, making extremely good money, but I'm also not motivated by it. And I talked about it in this piece that I recently did called Modern Entrepreneur, where in my last corporate gig, I was making almost a couple $100K a year. And if you say to someone, Ish, you're going to make $200,000 and you're going to be unhappy, you would think that I'm full of shit. You'd be like, dude, you're crazy.
Yeah,
I would be so happy. What's wrong with you? But you get to a point, and this is a key takeaway that I want anyone that's listening to this to walk away with. Money does not buy happiness. And money should never be a motivating factor as to why you stay in a job or why you stay in a situation that doesn't fulfill you. So I knew there was so much more that I want to do besides clock in and at 9 a.m. and clock out at 5 p.m. I enjoyed when I would go to a conference that there was respect that was given to me that I wasn't earning in at the corporation that I worked at. I knew that I enjoy speaking on stages because on stage I can teach and I can influence. Whereas when I go back to my corporate job, I'm just a senior manager that no one gives a fuck about, right? Like all that stuff, man, like messes with your psyche. So there were so many times throughout the last 2 years I worked in corporate that, for one, the organization I worked at didn't know what I was doing. Like, yeah, there was rumors, there was people, like there was at every company that would go back to the bosses and be like, hey, this guy's like doing this on the side, or this guy's like sneaking out, or do you know that he's at a conference? Like there's so much of that just became maintenance, and it became stressful to lie just to keep a job for a paycheck. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's funny because one of my advisors now, Nick Utton, used to be my CMO at BMC Software. And we've had this conversation and he's like, dude, if I knew all the stuff that you were doing behind my back, I would have had to fire you. So like, I'm glad that I didn't know back then. But like I told Nick, Nick, why does corporate America fault young men and women for trying to level up? Think about that for a second. It's not about the money that you throw at someone, because money's temporary. On paper, you pay someone $150K a year, but you're not giving them a check for $150K on January 1st. They have to work every single day and every single week and check off your box and meet your expectations and play the corporate game just to get a check after taxes. And places like San Francisco, you're not really making a lot of money. And you're not pushing someone to get to the next level. Now, here's what I would say. If throughout my career, I would have ever worked for a company that had a leadership program on how to be a CMO, how to be a CEO, how to be a CFO or CTO, then we're talking a completely different conversation, because going into it, this is probably gonna be a 2 to 3 year assignment. I'm going to be on the fast track to level up. So going back to LinkedIn, right? Why companies should treat their employees better than probably what they do and really look at them like assets or investments is your logo will always be in that person's LinkedIn profile. For the rest of my career, every company I've ever worked for will always be on my LinkedIn. So imagine if you are now developing employees, so they're not leaving you when they get tired of you, but it's a relationship. You're developing them and they're moving on to the next level. And guess what? If you develop someone, you actually have first dibs on keeping them, right? Someone's going to leave regardless. Like that's why I've broken down. Like you can't see this when you work at a company because you are so ingrained on the bullshit that's in front of you. You're ingrained on your next meeting. You're thinking about everything else that you're working on, your next campaign. When you don't work for a corporation anymore and you get to take a step back and realize the dynamics of a company, you realize, all right, we're all talented, but we're held back by job titles. And we're also held back by organizations that they don't have a structure in place to develop you and groom you. So the way it works is they're just trying to get as much as they can out of you. And honestly, in some cases, people just don't leave because they're afraid to leave. They get addicted to that check. They get addicted to and I say addicted loosely, but it's true. Like
they have constraints.
I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with someone like, you hate your job, but why don't you leave? Oh man, I make so much money here. So that's kind of bringing it all together, man. I got to a tipping point where I realized there's so much more for me outside of corporate. And let's call spade for spade. When you work for yourself, you're always going to have bosses. You're always going to have clients. And it's ironic because corporations now are the ones that pay me to consult. Corporations pay me to speak and do workshops. Corporations pay my company to do service work for them. So the corporation doesn't go away, but your relationship with the corporation is what changes, because now I can go directly to a CMO that I meet at a conference and he's looking at me as a peer. He's not looking at me as a direct report. Yeah, correct. He's looking at me as a partner that can help him. And like, here's the secret sauce. If you really want to go ahead and get corporate money and make it as an entrepreneur, you have to realize at the end of the day, you are working for the person that's cutting you the check. And it's not the corporation. It's the person that's literally cutting you the check. So my strategy, if you will, for biz dev is, let's say that you are a CMO at a company. I meet you at a conference and I'm now going to ask you, what's on your roadmap, Ish? What's next for you? Are you trying to be the CEO of this company? Are you trying to be a CEO somewhere else? Are you trying to move up?
What do you need help with?
What do you personally need help with right now that I can do for you? And how can we win together over the next year? Because when that executive headhunter comes calling for you, you're going to have to talk about what you've done lately and what your team has done lately. So guess what? I've worked in the four walls. I've worked for people like you. I've worked with people that are your direct reports. Let's work together. Dude, you come at anyone with that pitch, it changes the game. Yeah. It puts you in a position so many miles ahead than when you work for any company. And dude, like, you're probably the first time that I ever break this down the way I'm breaking it down for you and your listeners, like openly like this. Cause like, this is stuff that's just been on my mind, like marinating, that I've been waiting for the perfect time to talk to someone that gets it. And I know you get it.
It's almost like you're providing so much value to the other person and the decision maker that it would be foolish of them to not listen and take you seriously, right?
It's not that it would be foolish, but here's the thing that I've learned about the corporate world. And when I say the corporate world, I'm talking about the leadership, the side, the C-suite. They are experts at running their own shop, but they are not experts at what's happening outside of their own shop. Like, I can go to a C-suite executive who probably doesn't have a presence on social media, and we could have a conversation for an hour about the world of social media and where social media is headed. And they're going to look at me and say, like, I'm not the expert, but you are, and that's why I need to hire you. I'll give you an example. The way I wrote my book, The End of Marketing, my book is a pitch deck. So if I meet you at a conference and you know not much about social media marketing other than you have to have a presence there, I give you my book, you're going to go read it, you're going to come back and you're going to say, we are not doing A, B, and C at our company. We need you to do A, B, and C for us. Because it gets their mind thinking of what they're not doing. And, you know, like, again, when you work in corporate, you get to analyze how many people are in a job just collecting a check, not pushing the envelope hard enough. They're there just getting a check. They're not going out to the conferences. They're not reading TechCrunch on their lunch break. They're not reading Social Media Examiner to see what's coming down the pike. They're just trying to stay cozy just to get that next check. You got to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, 100%.
That's real talk.
Real talk, literally. Let's transition really quick and talk a little bit about Gil Media. What is Gil Media? How did it come about? And I guess the journey of how it's happened over the past maybe 2 years.
Are you fired up right now, Ish?
Yeah.
You should be. Yeah. No, you should be, because this is original content that there's nowhere in existence except your podcast. So you'll hear me talking about this. Look, I started up my company because, once again, I was working in these corporate jobs where I'd done the same job over and over for 4 different companies. And the job itself didn't change, but I knew that I had more to offer than just being a head of social media at a company. And being that I knew I had more to offer, as I started going out to conferences, people would hit me up and they would say, like, hey, can you do this for us? Can you consult? Can you advise? And I was at South by Southwest in 2016. And at South by Southwest 2016, I met the chief people officer at the time of Keller Williams Realty. And again, this is why you should go to conferences, because it expands your network and you never know who's in the audience. So to kind of tee it up for you, I spoke at the job fair section of South by. There was maybe 40 people in the audience, and one of the people happened to be a whale, right? Like, she was a person who cuts checks and was a decision maker. Yeah. So I get off stage. I'm with the chief people officer at Keller Williams. She introduces me later that day to the CEO of Keller Williams at the time. A month later, I'm flying to Austin. They're actually interviewing me for a chief marketing officer role at Keller Williams. We don't go to bed in terms of with that role, but we decided let's find a way to work together. And they needed help with creating a social media marketing curriculum for real estate agents for their network of 100,000 plus agents around the world. So I was able to land my first client. One of my mentors always had said to me, when you want to work on your own, you need 2 blue chip clients. So to kind of take a couple steps back, and this is advice for anyone that wants to leave corporate and work for themselves, you should not leave corporate America without having money coming in. It is really important that A, you have money saved up, and B, that you have paying clients. So if you leave work on a Friday and you clock into your own shop on Monday, you already have revenue coming in. And you're not just kind of starting, like what a lot of people do is they'll get fired or laid off from a job, and then they do the whole self-employed thing, and then they're desperate. It doesn't work out over a month. They make no money, and then they go get a job somewhere else. That in itself is like really unstable because you need, let's face it, you need money in order to keep you afloat and pay your bills. So I land Keller Williams, and now I'm still working this job. And I'm starting to now stash some cash away because I knew inevitably this job is going to go away. So the company I was working at the time starts going through rounds of layoffs. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to get laid off. Like, it's going to happen. Like, I'm not coming into the office. I'm still doing my job. But, there's starting to be like rumors and rumblings that I'm like kind of checked out. My boss gives me a heads up that layoffs are coming, and I don't get laid off on that first round. So I'm like, damn,
Lucked out.
got to play the game for a little bit longer. But I already knew like where the signs were going. Like if this company were to lay me off, I'm not going to go work for anyone else. Like I know this will be it, unless like something happens where it's an opportunity that just sweeps me off my feet.
Yeah.
So long story short-ish, second round of layoffs comes around. I'm in Dominican Republic, getting ready to jump on stage and do a keynote. Boss calls me up, says, "Hey man, just want to give you a heads up that you've been let go." And it's like, all right, great, cool. And I haven't looked back since, man. I already had my exit strategy lined up, and I was just waiting for the right moment. I think, again, there's a lot of people that I meet that they want to do the whole self-employed thing and then they just quit. And I always tell people you don't want to do that. Like you want to wait for that opportunity where if you can do a voluntary layoff, because as you know, most companies do like annual layoffs, put yourself on the list, volunteer, get a package on the way out. Right. And I think there's probably people that are going to listen to this and be like, man, this son of a bitch is, pretty savage. But look, man, that's how I've built my brand, is just keeping it 100. Yeah. And I wouldn't be Carlos Gil if I said it any other way.
Yeah, 100%. For the people out there that might not know what a media agency is, or not know too much about marketing and that whole world, can you maybe break apart what it is that you offer and the things that you do and kind of like the different projects that you work on?
So here's the thing. I did an assessment before I went out on my own with, okay, there are digital marketing agencies or a dime a dozen. So I started doing an assessment of like, what am I personally really good at without having to reinvent the wheel? So I knew right out of the jump, I'm not going to do an agency that does websites, SEO. Like there's so many different tasks in the agency world that you can either go down. Like there's people that start agencies just writing press releases, right? Because PR is their jam, or, community management is their jam. So the way that I structured my company was, all right, I've done employee advocacy launches at virtually every company I've worked at. I know the formula. I know how to activate employees. I know all the technology and service providers, Elevate being one of them. So I'm going to make employee advocacy like one of the pillars of my company, where it'll be just straight consulting. So I've been really fortunate to work with several different clients that we've launched their employee advocacy strategy for. Another piece of the business is community management. So a lot of companies out there, they need help with responding to customer inquiries. Now, the reality is that most companies have a very small, as you've seen, social media team. They don't have hundreds of people. They only have really a handful, if that. And those employees clock out at 5 o'clock. So when you're a newer agency, you have to be willing to take some of the scraps that other people don't want. So what really helped for me was, again, working my network, knowing who runs social at different brands. It was going to individuals and saying like, hey, if you need a video production team to come cover your conference, like in the case of DocuSign, consider Gil Media. We're there. If you need community management support, and you have needs like that arise on the weekends, after hours, and your team isn't clocked in, consider us. We're not going to charge you double the hourly rate that your agency of record would. Because like that's the thing that also happens in the agency world. Like employees at these agencies, they also go home at the end of the day. So what I'm trying to say is like, one, if you want to get into the agency world selling client services, focus on what you personally are really good at, and then scale by bringing other people into the business that can either take the load off of you and do what normally you would do, or B, hire experts that are good at what they do. So like I have a creative director in Luigi, right? He can do things with the camera and he can edit. And he can do work that I can't do. Yeah. So he brings value to myself and my team. So I would say be in the third or last piece of advice along those lines would be take the work that other people aren't willing to do. And I think that's really tough for some people because they want to be billing high rates. They want to be working prime hours. But when you're getting started, man, you got to be scrappy. You got to be lean. You have to be willing to take business on because money is money at the end of the day. And you need to take that money in order to invest in your business, to be able to like buy equipment like this, right? You need that capital. And the only way that you can do it in some cases is by taking on work that other people don't want. So it kind of goes back to that saying like one person's trash is another person's treasure.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like within your business, there are multiple different streams of projects that you have going on at any given time. Where do you find the most energy and what types of projects that you see yourself doing? Is that like building out the strategy, working directly with different companies and their teams and their social teams to train them? Or like what area do you think you gravitate towards?
I really enjoy the strategy piece a lot. I enjoy going into companies and doing workshops for them because here's the thing. Even though I've spent, the time that we've been talking, it kind of sounds like I've been talking a little bit down on corporate America. There are days where I do miss the vibe that you get of being in a corporate office, right? Because when you work for yourself, let's face it, you're not interacting with people like you would, like you're not having lunch with your homies in the cafeteria like you do when you're in San Francisco. Like that doesn't exist. So I do enjoy when I'm on site. I enjoy the workshop aspect, but I tell you what I enjoy the most is what's happening behind the scenes on the back end. Having conversations with clients of mine. A couple months ago, I happened to be in New York at the same time as one of my biggest clients. And we were meeting up at almost midnight, having a cocktail, having a strategy session. Yeah. Right. Learning about the inner workings of what's happening at their organization, moves that are being made. Like that's the stuff, man, that I love because I want to take pride in I'm doing something so much bigger than me, something so much bigger than what I would be doing in corporate.
Got it. Let's talk really quickly about Carlos Gil 2019. But maybe if you could talk about what does a week look like in your shoes? I like to ask people like, what does a day look like in your shoes? But every day is different in your shoes. And I know that following you on social and just knowing you over the past couple of years. So over any given week, let's say the different projects that you have going on, speaking engagements, like what does that look like? Because I know you're always on the road.
I live by my calendar. Yeah. So first and foremost, how do I put this into words? Because this has been something that's been on my mind a lot lately. People see what I do and they associate it with, for lack of a better term, fame and money. And what I've been telling a lot of people lately in private conversations on like Instagram DM, and I think you even saw me say this to a kid right before we jumped on here, was the more known that you become, the more people want your time. And the more people expect that you'll be available for them. So I used to enjoy sitting in the barber chair more than anything. That used to be my time. That used to be my time where I would disconnect. I would meditate. I'd talk shit with my barber and I would enjoy that time. I don't enjoy that time anymore because when I'm in the barber chair is an office. Yeah. It's an extension of my office. I'm working. I used to enjoy an Uber ride to LAX. Because it would be my time to look out the window, to let someone else take me to my destination. I don't enjoy that anymore because I'm on my phone. I'm conducting business. What I'm trying to say here is that, once again, the more you accomplish and the more you level up, so to speak, life changes. And it's not simple anymore because you have to be attentive to people if you really want to win in this game. I've learned over the years from admiring and really observing people like the Gary V's that what we do at the end of the day is a people-based business. You teach people, you make people feel better about who they are, you connect them with other people. You have to have a servant mindset if you really want to grow. And that's really hard for a lot of people because a lot of people look at relationships as being transactional. I kid you not, since I was 25 years old and was broke and had nothing, I've never looked at a relationship as being transactional. I've always looked at it as we're just two people that are kind of on our own journeys, and however I can add value to you, great. Let me know if there's anything that I could get from you. I'm going to tell you at some point when and if the opportunity feels right. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So where I'm going with all this is my days never look one and the same, but I try to live as close as I can to my calendar. So I knew, for example, this morning I had somewhere to be, and I knew that this afternoon I was going to spend with you. So I literally, I had to cancel an interview with someone else. And I had to shift some things around in order to make today happen. I don't like doing that, but there's priorities that come up, right? There's things that come up. Every day for me is trying to get one step closer to what I'm working on. There's a lot of things happening in the background. There's partnerships I'm trying to solidify. There's people I want to do business with. Right now I'm entertaining jumping on a plane Monday to go to New York just to meet someone for an hour, because I also know the way business gets done and transacted is in person. It's not through phone. It's not through text. It's not through a DM on Instagram. It's in person. So I would recommend to anyone out there that currently has a business or is looking to get into business is to have a vision of where you see yourself in a year from now, and 5 and 10. Realize that shit happens in life. You could be taken off your path at any given time, but the objective is to get back on that path so you can accomplish your goals. And I'll give you a very real example of that. I will be a published author here in a couple of months. And a part of me kind of feels like I got in this game late. Part of me is like, damn, I'm going to be 36 when my book comes out. I should have already now written 2, 3, maybe 4 books.
And if you want to touch like what the book is and briefly what.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. But so much time has gone by and there's obstacles, right? Like, I went through a divorce. I moved. I got let go from jobs. Like, all these things happen and it takes you off the path. But I tell you what, I've known since I got started in this game, I will write a book one day about this industry. I will write a book teaching people the formula. I will teach people the game. Everything I'm talking about here, I will teach people, because my mindset and my mission is to motivate, educate, and inspire. So what I've done just through this podcast is I've taught you about my story. Hopefully I've motivated you, but I've educated you and inspired you to do maybe something different in your career or in your life. So I don't think that necessarily answered your question, what like a week looks like, but to just kind of sum it up, there's a lot of meetings. And just being available for people, I think, is the name of the game.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you do every single day? Like any daily routines or daily habits?
I wish I did, other than brush my teeth and have a cup of coffee. My life is not perfect, right? I'm not going to sit here and say like, I meditate every morning and I don't check my phone until 8:00. And like, I'm not that guy, right? I'm really driven, man.
It almost sounds like having a structured calendar is your like habitual routine for better sake, I guess. Yeah, even look at... It gives you like the structure, right? It gives you the structure that you need in order to know exactly what you need to be doing, where you need to go and when. Even look at a couple of days ago when you and I firmed up to do this recording, I sent you a calendar invite. Yeah. Right after that. Yeah. Because I live by my calendar. If something is not on my calendar, it's not happening. And I'm probably going to forget that we even spoke about it. No, that's actually very good advice. And especially when I speak at conferences every single week, just about. So I need to know where I'm going to be, and I need to be able to plan accordingly for when I'm not speaking. It's almost like game days, right? Mm-hmm. In off days, where am I going to be so I can do something like this? Like, honestly, I don't do a lot of podcast recordings. With the book coming out, that will probably change, and I will have to dedicate like a day of the week to jump on a podcast and do stuff like this. Given that you have a book coming out, what is the creation of a book even look like? Like we chatted about it before this, but you mentioned how the past couple of months has just been a grind of like working on the book, doing research for the book, like figuring out how you're going to launch it, etc. So most people listening probably have not written a book and may not write a book in their lives. So if you could just talk about what that process has been like and what you've learned. The process itself was really humbling, quite frankly. In full disclosure, I don't read much. So I didn't go into this process of writing the end of marketing trying to emulate someone else's book,
because I don't really read. With that being said, I've known for the longest time that I want to be able to share what it is that I've acquired in terms of knowledge. Not to say that like I'm better than anyone else out there, but I do think that when it comes to knowing social media marketing, I absolutely have a leg up on 99% of people because I've done the job on the inner workings of a company. I told you this before we jumped on, it requires getting bitch slapped a few times in the boardroom by a CMO before you really understand how all of this works, because they don't care about vanity metrics. They care about real ROI, real leads, real business movement. All the other fluffy bullshit they could care less about. So I teach through the end of marketing a formula of how to humanize your brand through people. Whether it's taking your employees at a company where you work at and transforming them into advocates. And this, it goes so much further than just saying, oh, the book's about employee advocacy, because it's not about employee advocacy. It's as a whole, how to humanize your brand, whether it's a small business, a personal brand, or an enterprise corporation. It's listening to what's being said. So many people think that in order to be a good marketer, that you need to create good looking content. And that's actually incorrect. So many people say that content is king. I know you've probably heard that. And I always say that's bullshit. Community is king. And you don't need to create a single piece of content in order to build community, because guess what? The community already exists. LinkedIn, right? 600 million plus members. That's a community. Instagram, over 1 billion daily active users, 2 billion on Facebook. I could go on and on Snapchat, Twitter, 300 million daily active users. So these communities are pockets of people that already exist. If you just pay attention to what's being said by who and jump into conversations, you can create a brand just conversing. Conversation is content. So a part of the end of marketing is, 1, using social media as search engines to what's being said. 2, leveraging your employee base to promote you. And then 3, leveraging your customers to talk about you. So I'm a big fan of the company Greats. I wear their shoes. I'm wearing them right now. Last week when I was in New York, the CEO of Greats shared a photo of mine with Quavo where I tagged Greats on his Instagram. And I had no idea who it was. I'm like, who is this person? I just shared this on their Instagram stories and they tagged me in it. And I go to the guy's profile. I'm like, holy shit, this is the CEO and founder of Greats, the brand of shoes that I wear. How cool is that? Imagine if at scale you make your customers feel that valued. Now, I know already what's going to happen is this. I'm going to come across someone very soon when they read the end of marketing and they're going to say all this is great, but we don't have the people internally to manage this. And it's no, you absolutely do. You don't need to have someone with social media in their job title or community manager or marketing in their job title in order to do it. If you truly believe in the people that you cut a check to, you will train them to be your social media team. You will train them to be your community management team. And I'm going to convince them to get to that point. And then guess what they're going to ask after that?
How do I do that?
Can you do it for us? Because the book is a pitch deck.
Yeah. And then you've done all the marketing ahead of time because they're sold at that.
The marketing's already done. It's in the book. So that's the Easter egg of the end of marketing, is that I'm teaching you how to grow your business and how to humanize your brand. And it's teaching your employees how to be better marketers. So going back to your question in terms of how do you write a book, for one, have an idea that's different. So I was having this conversation recently with my dad. We were up in Montana and he was like, son, why do you write a book called The End of Marketing? I said, Dad, I know you don't follow my content, but me, your son, is kind of like a, rebellious person in the industry. I say a lot of things to get a reaction out of people, and it works. And it's kind of what I talk about in the book. Getting a reaction is getting attention. And the name of the game here is to get attention. In a noisy digital ecosystem, you have to do something different in order for people to take notice of you. So I explained to him, everything today is marketing. Everything. Sales is marketing. PR is marketing. Branding is marketing. Showing up. You're marketing yourself with what you wear. You market yourself in how you speak. So why do we call it marketing? There's something so much more than that. And in reality, people today are brands. So I started talking politics with my dad. And I said, President Trump, this isn't meant to be political, but President Trump, and I talk about him in the book, has one of the best social media presence online today. And I'm not, either way, I'm not saying like what he says is great or whatnot, but it's attention grabbing. He reels people in and gets people to talk about him. Imagine if Coca-Cola could do that. Imagine if Nike could do that. Imagine if Walmart could do that. They don't. But Jake and Logan Paul, the Catch Me Outside girl, could go on and on. DJ Khaled, Kim K. These are all brands. These are all brands that have value. And they're doing something right that major corporations worth of billions or trillions of dollars have not figured out yet. And that's how to be real.
For somebody who's out there maybe listening and they're thinking of starting a side hustle or even just working on their personal brand, what advice would you have for them as they're thinking through like developing this online using social?
What do you want to be known for? Go into this with having a very clear mindset of what you want to be known for. And I say this because people will come up to me all the time and they'll say, I want to have a personal brand, do what you do. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, you don't want to do what I do because what I do is very time consuming. Yeah. So you don't right now have to have everything figured out. You don't need to be viewed as an influencer. You don't need to be verified on all these social networks. But if you say to me, Carlos, I want to grow this podcast and I want to get sponsorships, I'd turn around and say to you, who are the people that this podcast appeals to-ish? And what are the ideal sponsors? And you would say to me, well, this appeals to musicians, entrepreneurs, business people. Okay. Would a WeWork be a potential sponsor? Would a Zoom be a potential sponsor? Like, who are all the different brands that are trying to connect with the audience that you're reeling in through your form of media? Yeah. Now, leverage social media to get in front of these individuals. You have to get in front of heads of partnerships, heads of marketing. Where are those people hanging out? Is this content that's valuable for them? Make sure your content gets distributed in front of them. Make sure that you write a Medium and a LinkedIn blog post describing every single episode and then distribute that content inside of the groups and the places where these people are having conversations. That's not difficult, but there is a science to it. I think a lot of folks jump in and on day one, they get discouraged because they feel that they got in the game too late. And look, you're talking to someone that is not an overnight success. I've been in this game for 11 years and I haven't even hit the critical mass, dude, where some days I see other people fronting on the gram and I'm like, damn, I'm sitting here with 30,000 followers. This person has 150. It's obvious to me that they bought their following, but I'll let them kind of be, right?
That's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole nother conversation. But what I'm trying to get with this is what really matters at the end of the day is having a qualified audience. If there's one thing that LinkedIn taught me really, really well as an employee working in their sales solutions business unit, I didn't understand lead generation because I didn't work in B2B before I went to go work at LinkedIn. After I left LinkedIn and I understood how B2B works and the purpose behind content marketing and funnels and drip campaigns and webinars and ebooks and this whole formula, I started looking at social media differently. I started looking at it as I want a qualified audience. It's just like doing a webinar at LinkedIn, right? 1,000 people sign up, but if there's 10 or 12 qualified buyers, do you really want the 1,000 or do you want the 10 or 12? Social media operates the same way. On my Instagram right now, there are people who follow me that are decision makers at brands that only follow maybe a dozen people. Maybe they follow 50, maybe they follow 100. But I can tell you the people they follow are very close friends, they're colleagues, and they're not posting the type of content I post or at the rapid rate that I post. Yeah. So that makes a difference too. So again, name of the game here is not to become famous on the internet. The name of the game is to live a happy life. And that's something that I think needs to be spoken about more, that we've gotten away from, because every one of these podcasts, every blog post I read today, it's how to get more followers, how to get more engagement. No one's really talking about, what are you doing this for? I'm not doing what I do to work in this industry my whole life. Yeah. At some point, I want to be able to mentor others. Same way I've built a relationship with you. I want to be able to coach 12 other DJ-ishes, right? No, I'm serious. That's why I do this. Because I want to be able to build a legacy through the other people I'm able to reach. That's why there's a book. That's why there's social media content. But this type of relationship is what I want to do more of. And social media, it's a vehicle to meet people.
Yeah, it definitely is. As long as you follow up in person, which you and I have done over the past couple of years. Working in the world of social marketing and as a business owner and all the things that you have going on in life, how do you find time to unplug? What do you use to unwind? it almost seems like you're always on the go, which you would literally are always on the go. You do work a ton. You have family. You have your business. You're speaking. You're around the world. How do you unplug and how do you manage it all?
I unplug when I am on airplanes. So I use that as me time. And I fly a lot. Yes. So at least once a week, I have a trip that I'm going somewhere and coming back from somewhere. So I use that as time. But, here's what I'd say. Like, there's no dedicated unplugging time. Mm-hmm. It's all based on the needs of the business. And I know that sounds really bad because, so many people, like my mentor and good friend, Brian Solis, talks about balance. I'm not a person to talk to about balance because I haven't figured it out yet. But I do know that you should reward yourself with doing more of the things that you enjoy doing with the people that you enjoy doing them with. So I love sporting events. I try to go to a handful of football games and basketball games when the season exists. Recently started going to Dodger games, right, which is pretty cool.
We're going to have to make it out to one.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I like to eat. Obviously I'm not slim and fit like you. So I like to treat myself to, Luigi's over there nodding his head. I like to treat myself to a good steak dinner. Cause like, here's the thing, bro. Like if you work hard, you got to play hard too. And I believe in celebrating your wins. So I like playing video games. Madden just dropped today. So I'm excited to go download it when I get home to play that. But again, like I always get asked this question on podcast about balance, and I always have to be just very honest and transparent. And sometimes the people that interview me are like, oh shit, like I wasn't expecting that, because a lot of people have these like rehearsed answers, but it is what it is, man.
Yeah, keep it real. I love it. A part of this podcast, and the reason why I'm starting it and launching it, and you're the second person that I interview, so thank you so much for the time. But a part of it is I want to share obviously the key learnings and the knowledge and the struggles and the stories of people that do dope stuff. But one thing I do want to take time also to throw back at you is provide opportunity for maybe anybody else that's listening right now on this podcast to help you. So what are some of the goals that you have coming up? Do you have anything that you're thinking of launching sometime soon, and or somebody that you hope to meet? Any goals that are top of mind right now or that are coming down the line?
I was in. I'm glad that you asked that. I was in Denver recently, mm-hmm. and one of my mentors, who ironically was trying to hire me to go work at Western Union before I went to go work at LinkedIn, and that's another conversation. But we were having dinner. And he said to me, man, like you're always on the road and you cannot sustain this. Like eventually you're going to get tired of this and you're going to get burnt out, and you're still a young guy. So he said to me, you might want to look at the business model to where you have like a Carlos Gil school of social media, mm-hmm. and you have coaches and trainers in other markets. And he's like, dude, with the following that you have, I am sure if you put out like a call to action on your social media, like, hey, come work with me. I developed a curriculum. You're going to be one of my coaches. He's like, you might want to start doing that. And I haven't even spoken. You're the first person I even mentioned this to, because he had like said it and like stayed in my brain. I was like, that actually could probably work. But I think proof of concept is just really important.
If you need somebody to test it with, let me know. I'm more than happy.
Let's make it happen, bro. So like the book that I wrote, The End of Marketing, is going to be a new vehicle for me because I'm already seeing the halo effect. And the book's physically not out yet, but I'm already seeing what I call the halo effect of more speaking engagements, higher paid speaking fees, more invitations to do things, just respect, credibility, like all these things that are amazing. But what I kind of struggle with is like, all right, I know, for example, my October, which is when the book launches, I already have like 7 speaking engagements, like one after another, it's great. I'm not complaining, but how do I scale that? So my methodologies of teaching can be everywhere without me necessarily having to be everywhere. Yeah. And that's probably a part of my business that I will focus on a lot in the coming year. Correct.
Being everywhere but nowhere at the same time.
Correct.
You do a really good job of that. I mean, you're working in the world of social. That's hopefully you would do that. So I would imagine that as the book comes out, it'll only increase. I wanted to take a second to reflect a little bit about the beginning of your career, maybe early 20s Carlos Gil, just barely getting to the world of social, still trying to figure out this whole corporate life gig situation. What advice would you give to that Carlos, knowing what you know now? And would you change anything?
Man, that's such a loaded question, because I think that we all are a byproduct of the decisions that we've made. So I could sit here and say like, yeah, I would change this and that, but I wouldn't be the person I am today. So I would suggest to a younger version of myself what I tell everyone else, which is save as much money as you can. Even if you're stashing away $100 a paycheck, save as much money as you can. Like liquid cash really makes a difference. And when you have money saved up, it gives you, no pun intended, buying power to call your own shots. No, it really does. Yeah. So if you're sitting there and you're putting money aside and you're putting $100 away every paycheck and you get paid 26 times a year, that's $2,600. You multiply that over the course of, say, 10 years of working, that's 26 grand. That at least provides you like a little bit of a nest egg. And, if you can contribute more, great. If your company has like a 401k and they match, like absolutely take advantage of that, because that is free money. And like, not trying to give anyone financial advice. I'm not a certified financial planner, but that's always my advice to people, because I know what it's like to be broke. Point blank. I know what it's like as an adult to be broke. Like there's a difference being a kid and still like you have like your mom and dad as like your security blanket to put gas in your car and provide food for you. And obviously your rent's taken care of. But as an adult, it's not fun to be broke at all. So I always take that side of advising people when it comes to like work hard, play hard, reward yourself. But you don't need the Rolex. You don't need the expensive car. You don't need those things. At the end of the day, no one gives a shit. Like the people that I worked with at Winn-Dixie didn't give a shit that I drove a Lexus when I worked at Winn-Dixie. I've never been into a meeting and had an executive ask me, what does my house look like? Those questions are irrelevant. They just care about the work that you can perform for them. So I would say the younger Carlos Gil, save money, do a much better job listening, and try to piss less people off. I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. And it's something that I've been working on a lot. So again, like you asked before about the book and the whole process. And the reason why it was a humbling experience is because as I was writing the book, I would find myself by myself in my office. And a lot of the story I'm telling you, you're going to read in the book, because I tell you story, but then I also teach you throughout each chapter. So by the end of the book, I want for the reader to feel like really connected to me. Like I'm their advocate, I'm their conduit, but there's also a relatability factor. And as I was going through and writing this book, I started doing this like mental inventory. And it's not a lot of people, but I started doing this mental inventory of people I've had beef with over social media over the years, over bullshit, dude. Like literally over not seeing eye to eye about how to use a bot or, what the purpose of social media is. Like, it's real crazy. Like you have to work in the social media industry to like really get it. But there's like beefs and animosity and people want to have like their own fucking rules. And I say this in the book, social media is the wild, wild west. Like there's no fucking rules at the end of the day. There's like FTC guidelines, but like there's no governing body that says like, this is how you conduct yourself. This is how you have to tweet. This is how you have to do X, Y, and Z. So I think it just goes back to maturity. It kind of goes back to what I said before. I was 30 working on LinkedIn. I didn't really take advantage of the opportunity. It didn't work out. I think at 36, I know more. I am just more mature overall. And I realized like, pissing people off to get a reaction on social media, it's just not a good look, man. Like there's people right now that they don't fuck with me, right? I've pissed them off. I've come across as arrogant or cocky or conceited on social media, and they just don't fuck with me. And I've made it a priority over the last year when I see these people at conferences just to go up to them and just say like, hey, what's going on? Mm-hmm. I've been seeing your work from afar. Congrats on the latest book that you wrote. Hey, great job on your speaking engagement today. Hey, you know what? I'm really sorry for the misunderstanding that we had. I was an asshole. Not expecting an apology from them, but me saying I was an asshole. Mm-hmm. And the whole process of just growing up and writing the book, I felt like it changed a lot in me, because I also realized I will be criticized. There will be people that leave bad reviews. That's a fact of life. There will be people that read my book and say, the book sucks, And like, these are things that you have to have the mental capacity to understand.
Yeah.
Understand other people and their feelings before you try to force feed people yours.
100%.
And I'd say if young Carlos Gil right now is listening to this in a time warp, that's probably the best piece of advice I would give him. And there is a lot of young Carlos Gils out there. I will say,
definitely.
That's the crazy thing about getting older. Like, even when I first met you, at one point I felt like this guy reminds me so much of me when I was younger. Like, there's so many people I'm meeting nowadays are 18 and 19 and 20. And I see these guys and girls and they remind me like identical to how I used to be.
I was going to wrap up the podcast with that question, but I have one more question selfishly. And I think you're uniquely positioned to answer to the best of your ability. Is you do a ton of speaking engagements, a ton. Like, I think you underestimate. Like, I asked you earlier today, I was like, how many times have you spoken this year? And you're like, shit, dude, I couldn't even tell you. I've done a ton. But what advice would you give to somebody who's looking like myself, looking to do more speaking gigs, just getting better at public speaking? And somebody who's done it over and over and over, what are some, I wouldn't say tips, but like, how do you mentally prepare? How do you get up on stage and kill it every single time? Make sure you have the energy and engage with the crowd and the audience.
To become a better speaker, you need repetitions. You need at-bats. You need to take shots. You need to fumble your way through it. Whenever I think that I've made it in this game, I go back and I look at my old content that lives on my old YouTube channel of me speaking to literally 3 people.
We were just chatting about this today.
at like a YMCA center in Hollywood, Florida.
Yeah.
I go back and look at young Carlos Gil at an ITT technical college speaking to 20 people about how to use LinkedIn to find a job. And it humbles me because the passion that I had then is what got me to this point. Because people pick up on passion. You don't always have to be the best, because being good, being the best is all subjective, right? The knowledge that I have, you can obtain it. It's not like it's proprietary. Maybe what I told you before about how to growth hack LinkedIn, yeah, there's elements of that I could probably package up and sell it. But, it's just practicing, man.
Yeah.
This is what I always tell everyone if they want to be a better speaker. Start off small in your own community. Before you go jump on stage and speak to 500 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, you need to get really good at speaking to 10. You need to ensure that you have material that people are going to walk away with feeling like their investment of time and money was justified. I realize that when I go speak at a conference, someone is paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to be at that conference. So when you factor in travel, including hotel, and the cost of the ticket and the time that they're spending away from their business. So I take this very serious, and I look at reviews of every single conference I speak at, and not just a numeric review. I want to read what people said. I was having this conversation this morning when I was driving back from LinkedIn Learning with a conference organizer, and we're talking about 2020. And I said to her, I want you to poll your audience, and I want you to find out from them what are the 3 things in social media specifically that they want to learn in the coming year, because I want to be your subject matter expert that's teaching them that. So it's always pushing yourself. It's first of all, start small, make sure people have actionable key takeaways, and be different, because so many speakers out there overlap when it comes to subject matter expertise. You have speakers that can teach you about not just social media marketing and LinkedIn, but YouTube, podcasting. Like, there's so many thought leaders today, but what's really going to set you apart in a league of your own is you. Yeah. It's not even the material that you're teaching. It's how you make people feel when they walk away from the conference. It's the follow-up. It's the fact that when you're done speaking, you're going to work the halls and you're going to shake hands with them and you're going to thank them for coming to your session. And that's going to be what makes you the highest rated speaker. And if you are the highest rated speaker, and if you are making people walk away feeling like they just made a great investment because they saw you speak out of all these other speakers, you know what they're going to do? They're going to invite you to go to their company and speak at their company, which means they're probably going to work with you as a consultant or as an agency. And if that company hosts their own conference, they're probably going to invite you to speak at that conference and be the keynote, which is where you make the big bucks. Yeah. A lot of people are getting into this game of speaking nowadays because they think it's an easy way to make money. It's not. One of my mentors told me early on, you have to speak at 50 events for free before you ever get paid. And they were absolutely right. You speak at 50 events, you're getting repetitions every single time. You're getting your at-bats and you're getting better and you're meeting people along the way. So don't do it for money. Yeah. Do it because the speaking engagement and the speaking industry is a gateway for something else. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
But my advice, like critical advice to you, if that's a path that you want to pursue, is what's the one thing that you want to be known for that you can teach people really, really well? Let's say hypothetically, if it's LinkedIn, what's your spin, right? You're a DJ. Mix in what you know really well with DJing that works with marketing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? How do you remix songs? How do you remix content? How do you create a playlist for songs? How do you create a playlist for content? How do you get the crowd's energy up and vibing when you're DJing? How do you do that through social media? So connect those parallels. And if you do that really well, I guarantee you no one else can do that, because there's one ish. There's a DJ. There's one DJ ish. We know that for a fact. And you're bringing the expertise that you have that makes you really good at what you do professionally, and you're combining them together.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like if anybody listened to this podcast and nobody found value, at least I did doing it with you. So
hopefully your listeners found value, man.
No, they for sure will have. And I'll make sure to do a write-up report of all of this and share it out on Instagram, Twitter, video. It'll be in the feed, and people will love it. So thank you so much for all of this. Do you have any final words for our listeners? You have a pretty good understanding of the audience that will be listening, hopefully, and the theme for the podcast. So any final words and where people can find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Carlos Gil 83 on social media. That's my Instagram and Twitter account. Also, go to endofmarketingbook.com to get yourself the End of Marketing. I also have some nice surprises coming, working on some let's just say top secret activities that go to endofmarketingbook.com, and I promise you won't be disappointed.
You heard it here first from Carlos Gil.
Thank you so much, my man.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Appreciate it. Peace.